A line of black smoke cutting across a quiet sky is the image that has settled into the minds of a whole town, thick, choking, and impossible to ignore. That smoke came from burn piles behind a family home. Neighbors started coughing. Children rubbed their eyes. Someone filmed the plume and sent it around on their phone. Now, months on, those same scenes are part of a much larger, darker story. 2 little kids missing, neighbors who say they warned authorities, and forensics that point to more than ordinary backyard burning. If you want to follow this carefully and help push the search where it matters, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you get every verified update as it comes. This is not a sensational claim slapped together online. It's a collection of consistent accounts from residents, searchers, and, according to court filings and investigative notes, material evidence that has been gathered and analyzed. People in the neighborhood say that what started as routine brush burning became regular, dense black smoke pouring from pits. Those pits, neighbors say, were not merely for yard waste. Witnesses describe acrid stench, repeated burning of unusual items, and an adult who suited up with a mask while children remained outside and exposed. For residents who breathed that smoke, the worry was immediate and practical: coughs, nausea, sore eyes. For investigators and forensic teams who later sampled soil and ash, the question shifted: what exactly was being burned, and why? In small towns, patterns show up quickly. Neighbors notice the same truck every evening. They remember the same face in a doorway. When smoke smells chemical rather than woody, it gets people talking. Several neighbors filmed the burns and noted the same details independently: thick, oily black clouds, a metallic tang in the air, and, crucially, a man wearing a respirator or mask while standing near the flames. Those pieces of information aren't opinions. They are observations that can be corroborated by multiple witnesses, timestamps on video files, and sometimes by smell reports logged to local health units. Neighbors described children coughing and complaining of headaches after those burns. Parents report that the kids' energy dropped and they seemed sicker than would be expected for ordinary colds. What made people increasingly alarmed was not a single incident but the repetition. A burn here and there is normal in rural areas. Repeated large burns that create thick black smoke are not. Residents who spoke to reporters and to investigators said the fires occurred with unusual frequency and often produced a distinct stench. One neighbor told investigators they saw plastic-like material in the flames. Another said they observed small items melting rather than burning in an ordinary way. That kind of reporting spurred investigators to treat the burn sites as potential evidence scenes rather than mere environmental nuisances. When investigators from the RCMP's Major Crime Unit and forensic teams visited the property, they didn't take neighbors' word alone. They collected samples, soil, ash, debris, and took detailed photographs of the pits and surrounding ground. Where the public record permits, those same court documents and search warrants describe lab tests run on collected samples. According to investigative notes that have been summarized in reporting, analysts detected compounds more consistent with burning plastics, solvents, and industrial materials than with yard waste. Those chemical signatures show up as a particular cocktail of residues and microparticles that forensic labs can identify. When such residues are present, they change how an inquiry proceeds. The burn becomes not only a potential health hazard but also a place where physical items, even small, telltale fragments, might have been destroyed. There are 2 immediate implications if burn pits contained plastics and solvents. The first is environmental and medical. Chemical-laden smoke can cause short-term symptoms: coughing, watery eyes, dizziness, nausea, and, with repeated exposure, can contribute to longer-term respiratory trouble. Neighbors' reports of children and adults experiencing coughs and headaches after being downwind of the pit are therefore consistent with what public health specialists would expect when certain materials are incinerated in open-air pits. The second implication is investigative. A burn pile that accepts materials which readily melt or dissolve, toys, plastics, electronics, solvent-soaked rags, can be a place where evidence is deliberately destroyed. That possibility shifts a missing children case from purely search and recovery to one that must consider whether an effort was made to remove traces that might identify what happened. Some residents went further, saying they saw partial remains of toys or melted plastics in the ash. Others spoke of clothing fibers or small items that looked like they belonged to children. For readability and fairness, it's important to clarify how such claims are treated in active investigations. Eyewitness accounts are critical leads but require physical verification. That's where the lab work matters. Forensic scientists can analyze ash and soil for microfibers, polymer fragments, and other trace evidence. Under a microscope or via chemical assays, fragments that look like melted plastic can sometimes be linked to a specific product or toy brand if distinctive features survive the burn. Similarly, textile fibers, even partially charred, can be compared to fabrics known to belong to missing children. Investigators combine such physical testing with digital records, GPS, cell tower pings, CCTV, to build a timeline and to decide where to search next. The reported discoveries, toxic residues in soil, charred toys, and the presence of small fibers, are the kinds of things that make investigators ask hard questions. If you're trying to pin down whether a fire was accidental or deliberate, you look at what was burned, the frequency of burning, the person in control of the burn, and whether protective measures were taken for the burner but not for others. Many neighbors noted, with visible unease, that the adult handling the burns wore a mask. Wearing protection while allowing children to breathe smoke would be, at the least, deeply reckless. It raises the question of knowledge. Was the burner aware the fumes were harmful to inhale? Did they take that risk seriously enough to protect themselves while failing to protect the children? Those concerns feed into both legal and ethical territory. If an adult knowingly exposes children to toxic smoke, child protection and criminal child endangerment statutes can come into play. Investigators must prove knowledge, intent, or recklessness, not easy things to show without clear evidence. That's why lab results and careful documentation are so important. They provide the thread that connects what neighbors saw to measurable facts. If forensic analysis finds, for example, residues that match common plastics used in children's toys, and if those residues are accompanied by small, identifiable fragments of melted plastic that match toys known to belong to the missing children, then that physical link supports further legal action. Beyond the science, the human story in the neighborhood is fractured and raw. Some residents have said they tried to report their concerns to local officials before the disappearance, and they felt their worries were minimized. Others claim they did not feel safe getting involved in a loud, complicated family situation. That hesitation is a sad, familiar pattern across many communities. Fear of retaliation, social pressure, or a belief that authorities will not take action can keep people silent until a crisis breaks open. When silence stretches into tragedy, regret floods back and neighbors ask themselves if they should have been more forceful earlier. The missing children's physical health has also been a focus. Residents described both Lily and Jack as more tired than typical children, with frequent coughing and visits to clinics for respiratory complaints. Medical records are confidential, and public reports summarize those records only when police or courts release them in redacted form. But the pattern described by multiple neighbors and some family members, repeated illnesses, diminished energy, coughing after smoke exposure, is consistent with environmental exposure to irritants. For a family trying to manage limited resources and daily stressors, repeated minor illnesses can be dismissed as ordinary. For health professionals, repeated respiratory issues in children living near chemical smoke would be a red flag that warrants investigation by public health authorities. Community outrage has a way of building once people feel their concerns were ignored. After the disappearance, neighbors who had been watching and worrying began to speak more openly. Social media groups formed, local vigils were organized, and folks plastered posters across town. Posters and candlelit photographs are often the public face of grief in missing child cases, but in this case they also became symbols of anger, not just grief for what was lost but anger at a system that, neighbors believe, failed to act sooner on multiple warnings. When the community's alarm turned into protests, the core demand was straightforward: investigate the burns fully, test the samples, and make the results public once they are verified. People wanted to know whether destructive burning had been used to conceal crimes. They wanted assurances that environmental hazards were addressed and that children were safe. Those calls for accountability touched a nerve because they go beyond a single family. They raise questions about how local agencies respond when multiple neighborhood members report the same dangerous behavior. There is another layer here. Rumors always follow gaps in official communication. When investigative files are redacted for legal reasons, the public space is filled by speculation. People fill gaps in their knowledge with theories, some plausible, some not. That's why investigators often release limited, verified facts, to keep the investigation intact while also preventing misinformation that could harm families or impede justice. Court filings in this case have included many redactions, and that lack of public detail has sometimes been interpreted as secrecy or incompetence. In reality, redactions are used to protect the integrity of evidence, the privacy of witnesses, and the future of any criminal case. The most practical takeaway, the reason this matters beyond headlines and hashtags, is simple. When potential evidence exists, it must be handled properly. Burn sites must be documented, samples must be tested in accredited labs, and findings must be weighed against other lines of evidence such as surveillance footage, witness statements, and electronic records. When all those elements line up, investigators can seek warrants, make arrests, or pursue other enforcement actions. When they don't line up, the result is continued uncertainty and more anguish for families. Because this is a human story, it's worth closing with human facts. 2 children are missing. Their family, their neighbors, and an entire wider community are living with the damage of not knowing. People are tired of rereading the same updates, of watching speculation spiral on social platforms, and of waiting for verified answers. If you believe you have information, a video, a photo, a memory about the timing of a burn, or anything that could help investigators, the most responsible thing you can do is contact the official tip line. Don't post raw accusations on public feeds. Instead, hand the evidence to people who can test it and act on it. We will keep following the verified facts as they are released. If forensic results confirm toxic residues and link burned items to the missing children, that will change the course of the investigation. If labs find ordinary yard waste and no traces of child-related items, that will also be important to know. Either way, the scientific process will speak loudest. For now, neighbors continue to light candles, post flyers, and comb the woods in organized, authorized searches. For investigators, the work goes on, analyzing samples, cross-checking digital footprints, and following every credible tip. The community's call for accountability is loud, and it's rooted in a basic demand: find the children, determine what happened, and ensure no family faces this kind of danger in silence again. If you've watched this through, please do one practical thing. Subscribe for verified updates, and if you have anything concrete that might help, contact the investigators handling the case. This is not about fueling outrage, it's about connecting evidence to action so the right authorities can do their job. 2 children are missing. Every solid tip, every recorded clip, every lab result can make the difference between a cold case and a path to answers.